Welcome friends, I'm Bev Adams. I'm an independent demonstrator with Stampin' Up! And today I'm not going to show you how to make a card, but rather some basic card bases and layer techniques. Almost all of these cards are designed to fit in a standard medium envelope from Stampin' Up! And the cards are all made by a piece of 8.5 by 11 cardstock cut in half. Now you can cut a card in half with 11-inch side. Half of 11 is 5.5. So we can cut that right there at 5.5. And then if you turn it, this is 8.5. Half of 8.5 is 4 1/4 inches. So I can turn it this way and score it with the light color on my scoring tool. And this will give you a really basic card base. You can fold it, and a lot of cards are made this way, or of course you can fold it this way. And I've got some cards to show you that are made with this standard fold. This one's got one big layer and some smaller layers, and this is the vertical. This one it looks like it's multiple layers, but it's really just stamped and sponged on one single half of a card. You can also make this a little bit fancy by making it a Z-fold. So to make it a Z-fold, we're just going to fold this part in half. If you remember, this is 4 1/4. Half of 4 1/4 is 2 1/8. So if I score it at 2 1/8, and then I can fold it back this way, and that gives us some other possibilities. Another way you can cut your 8.5 by 11 cardstock is the long way. With the 8.5 portion at the top, half of 8.5 was 4 1/4. And with the 4 1/4, then we can turn it and put our 5.5 this way, where we'll score it. Some people call this a tent fold. And you can have the card open this way or this way, and I have some samples of that. I made this at my friend Terry's house. She came up with that design, and that's a tent fold. And then this is a card I made. And then again, we can make this into a Z-fold. So this score was 5.5. Half of 5.5 is 2 3/4. So we just fold that back and have our Z this way. And I've added, this is a Z-fold card, and I've added a little layer with a narrow mat. Here's a modified version. If you cut it with the long way 11 and cut it at 4 1/4, 4 1/4, you can have two pieces, and then you'll have 2.5 inches left over. And I use that 2.5 inch piece for this layer. So this is a very thrifty way of cutting your card, and it's a modified Z-fold, I think. And then this one's a modified Z-fold, but it's got this funny flip part. Let me show you how to do that. I put it through my Big Shot, and I put my framelit with the center of the framelit right on that fold. But when I put the second layer on, I only put it on up to that cut. It looks pretty fancy, but it's pretty easy to do. And then the other basic card fold is called a gatefold. And so with the gatefold, we take the half of the cardstock, and instead of scoring it at 4 1/4, we're going to score it at 2 1/8. Just turn it around and score it at 2 1/8 again. So that gatefold card, you fold them to the middle, and then there's all kinds of different things you can do with putting a layer. To do that same thing with cutting the long way, half of 11 is 5 1/2. We're not going to score at 5 1/2, but half of 5 1/2 is 2 3/4. And again, we can just turn it around, score at 2 3/4 again. And then you can fold these into the middle. So those are the two gatefolds. And of course, any of these sort of fancy cards can be turned around either way. Here's a gatefold card I made. And this one has layers that are kind of interesting. I used my framelits and adhered half of this on the left side and half of the frame on the right side, so it has kind of a locking mechanism. This is actually called a joyfold card. This one is cut 8 1/2 by 4 1/4, scored at 5 1/2, and then you put a 2 1/2 inch strip folded in half, so this is 8 1/2 by 2 1/2, and scored at 4 1/4. So that's just a little card on top. So you can fold it down like that. Okay. Anytime, this is basically a modified gatefold, but instead of having the center, having the two edges meet in the center, I had it meet over here. And the important thing for this is just to have 5 1/2 by 4 1/4, so it fits in your basic envelope. Then on top of those we can layer, and I just wanted to show you some different layers that you can cut. So my basic card is the standard fold with usually one big layer and then maybe a second layer on top. The layers for my standard card are the basic card size, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. If I take off 1/4 of an inch off of 4 1/4 and 1/4 of an inch off of 5 1/2, I come up with the 5 1/4 by 4 layer, and often that will be my first layer. But it doesn't have to be. You can take off any increment of 1/4 of an inch. So I just kind of cut some. So this is a 1/2 inch smaller, 5 by 3 3/4. And if I have a large border like this, I might do some stamping around here, or maybe I would have the 5 1/4 by 4 inch layer be a designer series paper, and then I would be able to show more and more of that designer series paper. And you can also have a narrow mat, and you can play with all the different sizes of borders. Now another thing you can do is, if you've got these layers covered up, this whole center of this layer is really going to be hidden and wasted. Say if it was like this. So you can actually punch or cut a shape out of this layer, put it down, and it will be ugly, but you cover it up with this layer. So I've got all the dimensions of cards, of layers, taking off 1/4 of an inch at a time. Often I will have a large border that I may or may not stamp on, or may or may not use as with designer series paper. I might put a smaller layer on it, and then I would do my stamping on a Whisper White layer. So maybe I would have a card like that and do my actual stamping on white. There were a series of cards made with this idea, and I don't have the actual card anymore, but this is called triple layer stamping. And then what you do is you take the 3 white layers and center those as best you can, and usually use a little bit of temporary adhesive and do all of your stamping on this layer. And then when you layer them back with the colors in between, that will cover up any white edges that you might have, and it becomes a very quick, lovely layering technique. Kind of layer that I have to tell you about is Connie Stewart's flashcards. Cut it half, 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 so half again, into 8 pieces that are all the same size. They would be 2 3/4 by 4 1/4. And then taking another layer, and usually a light neutral for stamping on, cutting off a 1/2 of an inch and a full inch, and then cutting that remaining piece in half, 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 half. So these pieces end up being 4 by 2 1/2. And Connie Stewart has done some amazing cards with these layers and using those every little scrap. And she also has a flashcard 2.0, which is cutting in 1/8 again, but cutting vertically instead of horizontally now, and then cutting off a 1/2 an inch. And hers actually might cut off an inch and a 1/2 an inch this way, but I kind of like cutting a 1/2 an inch off of here and then using her same pattern. That way you can have the full 5 1/2 inch layer to use. Those are some basic card bases, and with those card bases and layers you can make an unlimited number of cards. For more information, come on over to bevadams.com and you can print out your lists of card sizes and layer sizes and card folds, and see lots of examples of different kinds of cards that you can make. If you'd like to order any of the cardstock from Stampin' Up!, that's all available at the Shop Now button, and that will take you to my little store at stampinup.com. Thanks. Bye.